Stepping out of the cab, I took a deep breath, the familiar scent of freshly cut grass and blooming magnolias filling my lungs. The quaint streets of my hometown hadn't changed a bit, but I wasn't the same wide-eyed girl who had left a decade ago, full of dreams and ambition. My heart sank as I approached Aunt Margot's porch. This was supposed to be a temporary refuge, but the words I overheard through the screen door shattered any illusion of a warm welcome. "Can't believe she had the nerve to show up here after everything." Margot's shrill voice carried like nails on a chalkboard. Her mother would be so disappointed. "Don't worry, Mom," Beckett chimed in, his tone laced with poorly concealed glee. "We'll make sure she doesn't overstay her welcome." The screen door creaked open, and Margot's beady eyes locked onto mine. A sickly, sweet smile stretched across her wrinkled face, but the look she gave me could curdle milk. Well, if it isn't the prodigal niece returning. I mustered a polite nod, swallowing the bitter retort on my tongue. "Aunt Margot, thank you for having me." "Don't thank me yet, dear," she sneered, ushering me inside with a bony hand. "You'll be earning your keep around here." Beckett emerged from the living room, his condescending smirk doing little to mask the jealousy that flickered in his eyes whenever he looked at me. "Hey, cuz, long time no see." He pulled me into an unwanted hug, his grip lingering a little too long. "Welcome home." As I followed them into the house that had once been a sanctuary, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a viper's nest. The game had begun, and I was the unwitting pawn in whatever twisted power play Margot and Beckett had concocted. Over the next few days, the tension was palpable. Margot treated me like an inconvenient house guest, piling on chores and deliberately excluding me from family discussions. Beckett, on the other hand, took every opportunity to mock my recent struggles, reveling in my misfortunes with a twisted sense of schadenfreude. "Heard you got canned from that fancy job of yours," he sneered one morning over coffee. "Guess the big city wasn't ready for your talents." I clenched my jaw, determined not to take the bait. It wasn't a good fit. I'm just grateful to have a chance to regroup here. Beckett let out a scornful laugh. "Yeah, good luck with that. This town has a long memory, and you're the black sheep of the family now." His words stung, but I refused to show it. I had come too far to let their petty mind games break me. This was my home, my family, and I wasn't about to let them take that away from me without a fight. As I lay awake that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging to my childhood ceiling, I made a silent vow. No matter what games Margot and Beckett were playing, I would unravel their twisted web of lies and deceit. The road ahead might be treacherous, but I was done running. It was time to face the storm head-on and reclaim what was rightfully mine. A week had passed since my unwelcome homecoming, and Margot's disdain showed no signs of waning. Every morning, she would greet me with a fresh list of chores, her lips curled into a sneer as she inspected my work with a critical eye. "Honestly, Raina, is this the best you can do?" she sneered one afternoon, pointing at a smudge on the kitchen counter. "No wonder you can't hold down a job." Before I could respond, Beckett sauntered in, that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. "Give the girl a break, Mom. She's just not cut out for real work." My fists clenched at my sides, but I bit my tongue. Losing my cool was exactly what they wanted. Later that week, I finally secured a job at the local boutique, desperate for any excuse to get out of that suffocating house. But even that small victory was short-lived. Well, if it isn't the failed city girl," Beckett sneered when I shared the news. "Bet you'll be real popular working retail with all your fancy degrees." Margot clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Just don't go getting any ideas, dear. This is a temporary arrangement until you get back on your feet." The implied message was clear. I was nothing more than a charity case in their eyes, a burden to be tolerated until I could be sent on my way. At work, whispers seemed to follow me everywhere I went. Former friends and classmates watched me with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude, no doubt regaling each other with tales of my spectacular downfall. "Hey, Raina, heard you lost your big-shot job in the city," one of my old high school friends, Kendra, said with a saccharine smile. "That's too bad. I always knew you'd end up right back where you started." I forced a polite smile, my cheeks burning with humiliation. "Just taking a little break, that's all." Sometimes you need to recharge your batteries. Kendra's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Well, good luck with that. This town has a way of trapping people, you know? As the days wore on, the isolation wore me down. Everywhere I turned, I was met with snide remarks or cold shoulders. Even mundane trips to the grocery store became exercises in avoiding judgmental stares and whispered barbs. It didn't take long to realize that Beckett was behind it all, spinning a twisted web of lies and rumors to alienate me from what few allies I had left in this town. My sordid, big-city misadventures became fodder for the local gossip mill, each story more outlandish than the last. It was clear that Margot and Beckett saw me as an intruder, a threat to be neutralized before I could regain my footing. And as the walls closed in around me, I knew I had two choices: wither away in their poisonous shadow, or fight back with everything I had. One sleepless night, as I stared at the shadows dancing across my childhood bedroom walls, the path forward became clear. If Margot and Beckett wanted a war, they would get one. It was time to stop playing by their rules and expose their twisted charade for what it truly was. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would show no mercy. "You're selling Grandma's land?" I fought to keep my voice steady, my fingers digging into the worn wood. The property she wanted preserved as a community park? Margot's expression was one of cold indifference. "It's a prime piece of real estate, and we could use the money, unless you'd like to start contributing to this household?" My mouth opened, then closed as 1,000 retorts battled on my tongue. Before I could formulate a response, Beckett swaggered into the room, cutting me off with a condescending laugh. "Why so shocked, cuz? Did you really think that scrap of land was yours?" His eyes glinted with malice. "Face it, you're just a guest here. A guest with no real stake in this family's legacy." White-hot anger flooded my veins as his implication hit home. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a rat scurrying through the walls of their home, to be exterminated or starved out at their whim. "How dare you?" I seethed, rising from my chair. "That land belongs to me as much as—" "Enough!" Margot's voice cracked like a whip, freezing me in place. "I've indulged your delusions long enough, Raina. This is my house, my rules." Her cold stare bored into me, daring me to challenge her authority. For a fleeting moment, I saw the twisted game she was playing, a cruel power trip designed to strip me of any semblance of dignity or autonomy. "I'm giving you a choice," she continued, her tone edged with venom. "You can accept your place as a subordinate under my roof, or you can take your chances out there." A gnarled finger jutted towards the door, the implication clear. Beckett leaned back against the counter, a smug grin plastered on his face as he savored my humiliation. Without uttering a word, he had made his allegiance known. Turn against me or face the consequences. A kaleidoscope of emotions swirled within me: rage, humiliation, desperation. This was supposed to be a sanctuary, a temporary respite where I could regroup and find my footing. Now the walls seemed to be closing in, leaving me cornered by those I should have been able to trust above all others. I opened my mouth, fully prepared to unleash the torrent of pent-up anger and resentment that threatened to consume me from within. But something made me pause, the ember of a newfound determination flickering to life. "Fine," I managed through gritted teeth, reining in my explosive emotions. "You want to play hardball? Game on." Without another word, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the kitchen, my mind already racing with the beginnings of a counterattack. If Margot and Beckett thought they could bully me into submission, they were sorely mistaken. I refused to be the victim any longer. From that moment on, the battle lines were drawn in earnest. I became a silent observer, committing every underhanded comment and manipulative tactic to memory. Slowly but surely, I began assembling the pieces of the puzzle, the true depths of their depravity taking shape. They wanted to strip me of my family legacy? Fine. I would rebuild an empire from the ashes, one that would make the name Mercer something to be feared and respected once again. And when the dust finally settled, there would be a reckoning. That twisted game of theirs was just getting started. In the weeks following Margot's ultimatum, an uneasy truce settled over the household. Beckett continued his petty needling, making snide comments whenever our paths crossed, but I met his barbs with stony silence, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "What's the matter, cuz?" he sneered one morning as I grabbed my keys. "City life finally catch up with you? I brushed past him without a word, his taunts falling on deaf ears. I had bigger fish to fry. My days soon settled into a methodical routine, work at the boutique, followed by clandestine meetings and information gathering. Slowly but surely, I began piecing together the true scope of Beckett's misdeeds in this town. First, there were the underhanded business deals, greasing palms to secure municipal contracts that should have gone to more reputable firms. Then came the whispers of more insidious acts, bribery, extortion, even allegations of fraud. Beckett's been running this town's underbelly for years. An old friend from high school confided over drinks one night. Anybody who gets in his way tends to have some bad luck. My blood ran cold at the implication, but I pressed on, making careful note of every scrap of intel. If I was going to bring these snakes down, I needed an airtight case. As my web of contacts grew, so too did the risks. I soon found myself navigating a minefield of shifting loyalties and interests, never quite sure who could be trusted. "Be careful who you talk to, Raina," Kendra, my coworker, warned after I broached the subject of Beckett's activities. "This town has eyes and ears everywhere. You don't want to end up on the wrong side." Her words struck a nerve, forcing me to confront the harsh reality that I was waging this war on enemy territory. One misstep could unravel everything I'd worked so hard for. But I was committed to seeing this through, no matter the cost. Gradually, the exhaustion of maintaining a double life began to weigh on me. There were nights where I would lie awake, replaying every potentially incriminating interaction in my mind, second-guessing my every move. I knew Beckett was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. And Margot, while keeping her distance, radiated a palpable sense of smug superiority that grated on my nerves. It all came to a head one fateful evening over a stilted family dinner. As I picked at the overcooked meatloaf before me, Beckett broke the tense silence with a barrage of snide remarks. "You've been awfully scarce lately, Raina," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Not getting into any trouble out there, are you?" Margot pursed her lips, but said nothing, her gaze boring into me with a silent dare to challenge her son's authority. That was the final straw. In a split-second decision, I reached into my purse and retrieved the meticulous file I had compiled, detailed records of Beckett's shady dealings, eyewitness accounts, even grainy photos of him exchanging illicit packages. "You want to know what kind of trouble I've been getting into?" I growled, slamming the dossier onto the table with a resounding thud. "Take a look for yourself." Beckett's cocky smirk faltered as he flipped through the damning evidence. For the first time since my return, I held all the power. "What is this?" Margot hissed, her bony fingers wrapping around the file like talons. My gaze was steely as I leaned back, letting the weight of her son's transgressions sink in. "Your perfect little prince has been running this town into the ground," I said, relishing the words, but not for much longer. The game was on, and this time I held all the cards. The annual Mercer family gathering was always a tense affair, but this year's event carried an electric undercurrent of anticipation. As I stepped into the backyard, dozens of judgmental eyes fell upon me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins all whispering behind cupped hands. Beckett wasted no time in making his presence known, swaggering over with a wolfish grin. Well, if it isn't the black sheep herself, gracing us with her presence. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Don't worry, cousin. I'll be on my best behavior." Before he could respond, Margot's shrill voice cut through the din like a rusted knife. "Everyone, please take your seats. We have much to discuss." As the family assembled around the weathered picnic tables, Beckett made a show of pulling out his mother's chair, reveling in the approving murmurs that rippled through the crowd. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. The performance was just another ploy to solidify his position at Margot's side. "Now, as you all know, our annual gathering isn't just about reminiscing," Margot began, her steely gaze sweeping across the assembled faces. "It's also a time to discuss the future of our family's legacy." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Beckett's smug smile, the unspoken message clear. He expected to be named the heir apparent, the keeper of the Mercer family flame. This was my moment. "Before we proceed," I interjected, rising from my seat, "there's something you all should know about our esteemed cousin Beckett." A hush fell over the crowd as I produced the incriminating dossier, letting it fall upon the table with a dull thud. It would seem our family's legacy isn't quite as pristine as we've been led to believe. Beckett's eyes widened in panic as I laid bare the sordid details, shady business deals, extortion, even implications of more violent criminal ties. A cacophony of gasps and muttered disbelief echoed through the backyard as I exposed every last dirty secret. "You lying bye." Beckett lunged towards me, only to be restrained by two burly uncles. Margot remained motionless, her face drained of color as the stark reality of her son's transgressions sank in. In the ensuing chaos, I locked eyes with my aunt, allowing the faintest hint of a smile to crease my lips. "You wanted the truth, Margot? Well, here it is in all its sordid glory." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing, powerless in the face of such overwhelming evidence. As the family erupted in heated argument, I stepped back, reveling in the implosion of their carefully curated facade. The reckoning had begun. In the aftermath of the family gathering, the fractures that had been laid bare only deepened. Beckett's web of criminal dealings unraveled at a dizzying pace as the local authorities pounced, emboldened by the evidence I had provided. Within days, he found himself under investigation, his assets frozen and a cloud of suspicion hanging over every business venture he had touched. The once smug prince had become a pariah, his name reviled from every corner of the town he had exploited. And Margot? Her fall from grace was just as precipitous. As the matriarch who had turned a blind eye to her son's misdeeds, she became a social outcast, shunned by the very people who had once fawned over her every move. It was almost impressive how quickly the tide had turned. One moment, they were the revered pillars of our community. The next, they were untouchables, radioactive figures to be avoided at all costs. I, meanwhile, found myself thrust into an unlikely position of power. With Beckett's criminal empire in shambles, someone had to step in and salvage what remained of our family's legitimate business interests. And in the eyes of many, I was the only Mercer untainted by scandal. It wasn't a mantle I accepted lightly. Part of me still harbored doubts, wondering if I was truly cut out to lead in the wake of such turmoil. But as I surveyed the wreckage left behind by Beckett's greed, I knew I had no choice but to try. My first order of business was damage control, auditing every deal, every partnership, and severing ties with anyone even remotely connected to Beckett's illegal activities. It was a grueling process, made all the more difficult by the lingering stench of mistrust that permeated every interaction. "How can we be sure you're not just another snake in the grass?" one skeptical investor accused during a tense meeting. "You Mercers have a talent for betrayal, it seems." I bit back the angry retort that danced on my tongue, forcing myself to remain composed. "I'm well aware of the challenges ahead, but I'm committed to righting the wrongs of the past. This family's legacy deserves better." It was a hard-fought battle, but slowly, brick by brick, I began rebuilding our reputation from the ashes. Shady deals were terminated, criminal associates were cut loose, and a new culture of transparency took root. All the while, Margot remained conspicuously absent, holed up in her dilapidated home like a wounded animal. Part of me wondered if she would ever emerge, or if the humiliation of her son's downfall had finally broken her indomitable spirit. That question was answered one dreary afternoon when I returned home from the office to find her skeletal figure hunched on my doorstep, eyes downcast. I don't know what to say," she murmured as I approached, her voice a ragged whisper of its former authoritative tone. Part of me wanted to revel in her suffering, to exact the ultimate revenge for all the pain and anguish she had inflicted. But as I studied her shrunken form, something cold and hard twisted in my gut. Pity. With a resigned sigh, I unlocked the door, holding it open in silent invitation. Margot looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of shame and relief. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. With Beckett disgraced and facing potential criminal charges, I turned my attention to the next battle, securing my rightful inheritance. Grandma's cherished plot of land, the one Margot had so casually tried to sell off, would be the first step in restoring the Mercer family legacy. But negotiating with my aunt in the wake of her son's downfall proved to be a delicate dance. "I don't know what you want from me," Margot muttered, slumped in the chair across from my desk like a broken marionette. "You've taken everything else." I fought back the urge to roll my eyes at her melodramatics. Don't play the victim, Margot. This is about making things right. Her gaze hardened, a flicker of her old defiance shining through. By taking that land, ripping away the last scrap of dignity I have left? It was never yours to sell in the first place, I countered, sliding a sheaf of documents across the desk. Grandma's will clearly states that the property belongs to me upon her passing. Margot's bony fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages, the damning legal language staring back at her. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt a pang of pity for the broken woman before me. Almost. You can't do this, she whispered, desperation creeping into her voice. That land is all I have left. I leaned back, fixing her with a level stare. Actually, you have a choice. The property becomes a community park as Grandma intended, under my stewardship, or you fight me on this and lose everything. Her shoulders slumped in defeat as the weight of her circumstances finally sank in. Any legal challenge she mounted would be quashed, her reputation too tarnished to gain any traction. Margot was well and truly boxed into a corner of my making. Fine, she growled through gritted teeth. Take your damn park, but don't think for 1 second that I'll ever forgive you for this. A thin smile played across my lips as I slid the contract across the desk, reveling in her impotent fury. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Margot, just your compliance. As her gnarled hand trembled over the dotted line, I allowed myself a moment of vindication. The first chess piece had fallen into place. Over the next few months, I steadily consolidated my hold over the family's interests. One by one, the remaining assets trickled under my control as Margot's influence withered and died. Even Beckett's last flailing attempts to cling to power were rendered moot as the legal walls closed in around him. By the end of that turbulent first year, I stood at the apex, overseeing the resurrection of the Mercer Empire from the ashes of deceit and betrayal. It was an empire built on transparency, integrity, everything those snakes had once lacked. The true test, however, came with the groundbreaking ceremony for Grandma's community park. As I stood before the assembled crowd, I couldn't help but bask in the moment, relishing the look of barely contained fury etched onto Margot's face. This was my legacy, my crowning achievement, and she could do nothing but watch as the culmination of her failures played out before her. Today marks a new dawn for our town, I proclaimed, my voice carrying over the hushed gathering. A green space where families can come together, unburdened by the sins of the past. I paused, letting my gaze settle on Margot with a pointed stare. Those driven by greed and malice would seek to spoil this gift, to defile its sacred purpose. But their pernicious influence has been purged, allowing this spirit of community to take root and thrive. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and I could see the anger simmering behind Margot's eyes. This was the ultimate humiliation, and we both knew it. As the ceremonial first shovel broke ground, I felt an immense sense of catharsis wash over me. The turnaround, so many years in the making, was finally complete. Beckett's star had fallen, Margot's reign of toxicity had ended, and in their place a new order was born, one built on the ideals Grandma had embodied, the true heart of our family's legacy. It was everything they had once sought to deny me. And I had seized it through resilience, determination, and a heaping dose of hard-earned karma. In the months that followed the opening of Grandma's park, Oakville settled into an era of rebirth and renewal. The open space quickly became a beloved gathering place, a verdant oasis in the heart of our humble town. I lost track of how many times parents approached me, eyes shining with gratitude as their kids frolicked on the playground equipment or kicked a ball across the lush greenery. "Thank you for doing this," they would murmur, their words carrying a depth of emotion that no business success could ever match. Our community deserves this. As for Margot, our relationship remained frosty at best. She avoided public outings, electing to shroud herself in self-imposed exile rather than face the prying eyes of those who had witnessed her spectacular fall. Part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of remorse at how events had unfolded. For all her faults, she was still family, still the woman who had once been a second mother to me during those halcyon childhood summers. But the scars ran too deep, the specter of betrayal casting a pall over any hint of reconciliation. We crossed paths only when strictly necessary, the occasional terse meeting to discuss residual family matters or legal obligations. Our barbed exchanges were a twisted dance, each of us probing for weaknesses and finding none. At least that's how it was, until the day she showed up unannounced on my front step. "We need to talk," Margot murmured, her eyes downcast as she invited herself into my living room. I tensed, readying myself for whatever fresh salvo of resentment she planned to unleash. But the venom never came. Instead, she regarded me with a look that could almost be mistaken for wistfulness, her usual imperiousness conspicuously absent. "I did some thinking while I was away," she began, worrying her hands in her lap, "about the path that led us here, the choices I made that put my priorities in the wrong place." I said nothing, but my eyebrow arched ever so slightly, coaxing her to continue. "What I'm trying to say is—" She faltered, visibly struggling to force the words out. "I was wrong, Raina, about everything." The admission hung in the air, so unexpected and uncharacteristic that I found myself temporarily stunned into silence. This was the indomitable Margot Mercer, a proud, vindictive woman, admitting fault, apologizing. "I don't expect your forgiveness," she pressed on, her voice strained. "I know I squandered any chance at that a long time ago, but I owe you this reckoning, I suppose." I opened my mouth, then closed it, feeling uncharacteristically unmoored by her contrition. The bitterness still lingered, as potent as ever, but after so many years of hostility and rancor, this olive branch, however belated, represented a chance to finally exorcise the demons of our shared history. "Thank you," I said at last, the words tasting unfamiliar on my tongue when directed at her, "for acknowledging that, at least." Margot nodded, her eyes glistening with something resembling remorse. We both knew that this wasn't forgiveness, nor even the start of rebuilding what had been shattered beyond repair. But it was a start, however small and fragile. A chance to shed the burdens of the past and move forward, unburdened by the recriminations and deceits that had poisoned our family tree for far too long. As she stood to leave, I found myself struck by how diminished she seemed. A husk of the imperious, cunning woman whose shadow had loomed over my life for so many years. In her place was someone human. Flawed, yes, but finally awakened to the consequences of her own sins. Perhaps that realization, however belated, could serve as the foundation for a new era in the Mercer family legacy. One where integrity and accountability took precedence over ambition and greed. Or perhaps it was merely the first step in a long, arduous road towards personal redemption for us both. Only time would tell. But as I watched Margot's withered form disappear into the fading summer dusk, I felt an unshakable sense of purpose settle over me like a warm embrace. The storm had passed, the monsters had been vanquished, and in their wake the path towards healing, for me, for this town, for the rightful legacy we all deserved, could finally begin. The shrill beep of the smoke detector jolted me awake. I bolted out of bed and ran to Lucas's room, heart pounding. Thick plumes of smoke billowed out from under his door. I barged in, waves of heat hitting me. Lucas was sitting up in bed, crying and coughing as acrid fumes filled the room. "Lucas, are you okay?" I yelled over the piercing alarm. He reached for me, tears streaming down his soot-smudged cheeks. Scooping him into my arms, I dashed out of the room. Jonah lounged in the hallway, an empty popcorn bag and can of butane at his feet. He watched us with amusement as I frantically patted Lucas's back, trying to soothe his hacking coughs. "What did you do?" I demanded, glaring at my 17-year-old stepson. Lucas wailed, burying his face in my shoulder. Jonah smirked. "Chill out, it was just a prank with some smoke bombs. The kid needs to toughen up." Fury boiled inside me. "He's 6 years old. You could have seriously hurt him." "Yeek," Jonah snickered. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a harmless joke." He whipped out his phone and started recording us. I wanted to slap that smug look off his face, but Lucas was trembling in my arms, his safety my priority. I carried him outside into the cool night air, rubbing his back gently. "It's okay, baby. Just breathe," I soothed. After a few gulping breaths, his cries tapered to whimpers, but he still clung to me like a lifeline. My blood boiled. This was the last straw. Ever since I married Theo 3 years ago, gaining an insolent teenage stepson in the process, Jonah's pranks had grown increasingly menacing. Lucas was his favorite target. Just last week I'd found Lucas's favorite stuffed animal, gutted and hung from the ceiling fan. the mutilated fluff strewn across his bedroom. Jonah had dismissed it as childhood fun and games when I confronted him. Theo always excused Jonah's behavior, calling me oversensitive. Boys will be boys, he'd say with an indifferent shrug. But this felt different, crueler. Jonah sidled up, phone extended as he recorded us. "Oh, is little Lucas scared?" he taunted. Lucas whimpered and hid his face. I tightened my arms around him. "Get away from us," I snapped at Jonah. "Haven't you tormented him enough?" Jonah's lip curled. "I was just messing around." God, learn to take a joke. My hands shook with anger. I wanted to knock that phone out of his hand and wipe that smug look off his face. But Lucas needed me. I carried him inside, throwing a vicious glare at Jonah. "We're not finished here." After settling a sniffling Lucas in my bed and checking for any signs of smoke inhalation, I stormed back outside. Jonah lounged against the porch railing, chuckling over his phone, probably already posting the video online to further humiliate Lucas. "Just what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. He glanced up with a casual sneer. "It was a prank. Don't get your panties in a twist." "A prank? You terrified a 6-year-old boy, filled his room with smoke." Jonah rolled his eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. Can't you take a joke?" I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "This isn't funny. Your bullying has to stop. Do you hear me?" He let out an exaggerated yawn. "Don't tell me how to live my life. You're not my mother. As long as you're under my roof, you'll show Lucas respect." I held his challenging stare. "If this continues, there will be consequences." Jonah's lip curled in a derisive sneer. "Ooh, I'm so scared. What are you going to do? Ground me?" He laughed mockingly. Fury boiled inside me, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I turned on my heel and went back inside to comfort Lucas, knowing this was far from over. Jonah's cruelty demanded retribution. If Theo refused to discipline his son, then I would handle this my way. The next morning, I recounted the smoke bomb incident to Theo over breakfast. He sat sipping his coffee, shrugging indifferently, as I described Jonah's malicious prank. "Boys will be boys," he said dismissively. "I'm sure Jonah didn't mean any real harm. He just wanted to have some fun." I stared at him in disbelief. "Fun? He terrified a 6-year-old, filled his room with smoke." Theo waved his hand. "You're overreacting. Lucas needs to toughen up." My anger surged. I pointed an accusing finger at him. "This is your son we're talking about. Aren't you going to discipline him?" Theo's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Don't tell me how to parent my own kid. If I talked to you that way about Lucas, you'd have my head." I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my frustration. Ever since I married Theo, he'd undermined my authority with Jonah, encouraging his son's insolence. Things were only getting worse. "Lucas won't sleep in his own room now," I said evenly. "He's terrified Jonah will hurt him again. As his father, you need to take action here." Theo drained his coffee and stood up. "I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later." He pecked my cheek and headed out the door, avoiding my gaze. I wanted to scream. Lucas was suffering while Theo stuck his head in the sand. He always made excuses for Jonah's behavior, but this had gone too far. After dropping Lucas at school, I called my friend Alicia. I confided my concerns about Jonah escalating his bullying. "That sounds serious," she said. "Can Theo set some boundaries?" I sighed. "Theo refuses to discipline him. He undermines me whenever I try to curb Jonah's behavior." "Yikes, that's a red flag," Alicia said. "Have you considered family counseling?" The suggestion rankled me. Why should Lucas be subjected to therapy because of Jonah's cruelty? As his mother, it was my job to protect him. If Theo wouldn't act, I needed to take matters into my own hands. A seed of an idea began to form. Theo's lackadaisical parenting had enabled Jonah's reprehensible behavior for too long. It was time for me to push back, to finally hold both of them accountable. When Lucas came home, he seemed shaken. With some gentle prodding, he confessed that Jonah had cornered him at recess, whispering chilling threats about their next prank. My blood boiled. This had to stop. That night after Lucas was asleep, I confronted Theo again. "We need to send Jonah to counseling, set firm boundaries." He threatened Lucas again today. Theo didn't even glance up from his computer. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Lay off the kid." I slammed my hands on the desk. "Why are you ignoring this? He's tormenting Lucas." Theo's glare chilled me. "I won't tell you again. Back off." The finality of his words stunned me. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. Theo would always put Jonah first, no matter what cruelty he inflicted. Fine, I thought. If Theo refused to protect Lucas, then I would. It was time to take matters into my own hands. No more pleading or idle threats. If I wanted to put an end to Jonah's bullying for good, I needed to outmaneuver them both. I lay awake planning that night, cold purpose flowing through me. I would beat Theo and Jonah at their own game. Justice would be served. The sound of shouting jolted me from my thoughts. I was volunteering in Lucas's classroom when raised voices echoed from down the hall. Exchanging puzzled glances with the teacher, I stepped out to investigate. At the end of the corridor, a crowd had gathered. Drawing closer, I realized the commotion was coming from the principal's office. Absolutely unacceptable behavior, an irate father bellowed. Principal Collins tried placating the man, but he angrily brushed her off. My son's got a black eye thanks to that punk. My breath caught. It didn't take a genius to know who the father was referring to. Sure enough, a sullen Jonah slouched in one of the office chairs, glaring defiantly as the man continued shouting. Principal Collins noticed me lingering in the doorway. Arya, perhaps you could provide some insight into this unfortunate incident, she said delicately. I averted my gaze from Jonah's defiant stare. I'm afraid I don't know what this is regarding. The irate father whirled on me. That hooligan of yours attacked my boy in the parking lot this morning, punched him right in the face. I felt Jonah's glare boring into me. Keeping my expression neutral, I turned to Principal Collins. I'm very sorry this happened, but I don't see what this has to do with me. The man's face reddened. Don't play dumb. You need to keep that punk on a tighter leash. He jabbed an accusatory finger towards Jonah. Maintaining my composure, I firmly stated this was an issue between the two boys. I avoided meeting Jonah's stare, refusing to be manipulated by him anymore. After diffusing the situation, I returned to Lucas's classroom. But inwardly, my mind raced. Clearly, Jonah's bullying had not only escalated, but gone public. I needed to take action before Lucas became his next victim at school. That afternoon, I confronted Theo, urging us to present a united front on discipline. But true to form, he refused to even discuss the incident at school today. It's none of our business, he said indifferently. Let the principal handle it. I gaped at him. Jonah assaulted another child. We need to intervene before this escalates. Theo turned on me, eyes blazing. You always undermine my parenting, overstepping your bounds with my son. He jabbed his finger at me. Jonah is my responsibility, not yours. His words cut me deeply. I fought to keep my voice steady. Lucas's safety is my priority. If Jonah is bullying others, it's only a matter of time before he targets Lucas again. Theo crossed his arms. You're being paranoid. Lucas needs to toughen up and handle things himself. I stared at him in disbelief. He's 6 years old. Jonah is practically an adult. Why are we subjecting a little boy to his abuse? That's enough, Theo shouted. I won't have you question my parenting anymore. Stay out of matters with Jonah. He stormed off, leaving me shaking with frustration. Once again, Theo refused to acknowledge the severity of Jonah's behavior. He was delusional, blinded by his loyalty to a son who refused any accountability. Meanwhile, Lucas was suffering, his innocence being chipped away by Jonah's malicious actions. If Theo wouldn't protect Lucas, then the duty fell to me. After today's confrontation at school, it was clear this dysfunction couldn't be fixed from within our broken home. I needed to look for justice elsewhere. I awoke to muffled sobs coming from Lucas's room. Heart-clenching, I rushed down the hall to check on him. I found Lucas curled up on the floor, hugging his knees as he cried. Shredded paper was strewn all around him, the remnants of his beloved comic book collection. Lucas, what happened? I asked gently, sitting down and pulling him into my lap. He buried his face in my shoulder. Jonah came in and ripped up all my comic books, he whimpered. I stiffened, stroking his hair as I surveyed the destruction. Jonah had decimated Lucas's prized possession, leaving the colorful scraps littered across the carpet. There, it'll be okay, I soothed, while rage burned inside me. This had Jonah's cruelty written all over it. Just then, Jonah's mocking voice sounded from the doorway. Ah, is baby Luca crying over his stupid comics? Lucas shrank back against me. I glowered at Jonah, instinctively tightening my protective hold. That's enough, just leave us alone. Jonah smirked, leaning against the doorframe. Those kitty comics were dumb anyway. Luca needs to grow up. Blood pounded in my ears. You had no right to destroy his belongings. Get out! Make me, Jonah sneered. Don't tell me how to live my life. I trembled with rage. This insolent punk had the audacity to torment Lucas right under our roof. I wanted to slap that smug look off his face. Jonah laughed coldly. God, you two need to lighten up. They're just stupid comics. He sauntered away, whistling mockingly. My fists clenched. I had to get Lucas away from here, somewhere Jonah couldn't terrorize him. Over the next week, Jonah's bullying escalated. Menacing texts, destroyed toys, callous verbal abuse. Lucas was subjected to it all. My heart broke watching my sweet little boy become more withdrawn and fearful. Meanwhile, Theo continued making pathetic excuses. It's just normal sibling rivalry, he claimed. Lucas needs to toughen up. But the final straw came late one night when I discovered Lucas's beloved goldfish, Bubble, belly up in his tank. Scrawled on the tank in red marker were the words, "Snitches get stitches." It didn't take a genius to deduce the culprit behind this vicious threat. I'd had enough. Theo refused to protect Lucas, so it was up to me to take matters into my own hands. The next day I withdrew a large sum of cash from my personal savings account, money Theo knew nothing about. For weeks now, I'd been compiling evidence documenting Jonah's reprehensible behavior and Theo's enabling complicity. I tucked the cash safely away, finalizing my plans. That night, I confronted Theo one last time, pleading for us to present a united front with discipline. He reacted with his usual indifference laced with disdain for my parenting concerns. I won't tell you again, he warned. Let me handle my own son. He stormed off, leaving me with icy resolve. Fine, I thought. I'll handle this my way. Lucas had suffered long enough while Theo stuck his head in the sand. His loyalty would always lie with his bully of a son. Well, not anymore. I was done being gaslighted and undermined. Lucas's innocence was being stripped away by the day under this toxic roof. If Theo refused to act, I would. It was time for me to take back control and finally put an end to this dysfunctional household. No more playing nice or following the rules. Justice would be served, one way or another. Over the next few weeks, I discreetly gathered evidence of Jonah's bullying and Theo's enabling behavior. I compiled a dossier of photos documenting Jonah vandalizing Lucas's belongings, screenshots of threatening texts, and even audio recordings of their vicious verbal abuse. I also started tracking Theo's movements, keeping a detailed log of his activities. He claimed to be working late most nights, but I suspected another motivation. My suspicions were confirmed when I followed him one evening to a seedy casino. So while our savings dwindled from Jonah's expensive gadgets and clothing, Theo was pissing away money gambling. Armed with concrete proof of their deception, it was time to put my plan into action. I withdrew the last of my personal savings I'd been hiding from Theo, gathering essential documents and retaining a lawyer on the down low. When the day came, I wanted to be ready for a clean exit with Lucas in tow. But I needed a catalyst first, something to publicly expose both Theo and Jonah's deceit in an irrefutable display. The time had come for consequences. The perfect opportunity arose a few weeks later at Thanksgiving. Both our families would be gathering for the holiday meal, the ideal audience for what I had in mind. I made sure Lucas stayed by my side the entire afternoon, protecting him from Jonah's torments. Right on cue, as dinner concluded, Jonah made a snide comment about Lucas wetting the bed the other night. Lucas's lip trembled at the callous humiliation in front of our whole family. It was time for the curtain to drop on this charade. I plugged my phone into the TV and began playing the video I'd compiled documenting Jonah's relentless bullying. "What is this?" Theo demanded, reaching for the remote. I smacked his hand away, increasing the volume. "This is the truth." For 10 excruciating minutes, our families witnessed Jonah's despicable behavior via the photos, videos, and screenshots I'd collected. By the end, tears were streaming down Lucas's face. Theo looked on in shock, rendered speechless. When the video ended, I calmly ejected my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Stony silence engulfed the room. You could hear a pin drop. Theo found his voice first. "How could you ambush us like this?" His face reddened with embarrassment and fury. I met his gaze coolly. "Don't blame me for exposing the dysfunction you've enabled under your roof." Murmurs arose from our gathered family. Lucas clutched my hand tightly. I gave a gentle, reassuring squeeze before turning my glare on Jonah. He pointed an accusing finger at me, sneering, "You psycho bitch!" Gasps erupted from around the table. Lucas buried his face in my shoulder. I maintained icy composure. "This charade ends today. I'm filing for divorce and sole custody." Theo shot to his feet. "Over my dead body, Jonah is my son!" "Perfect." I reached into my handbag and retrieved the manila envelope containing my evidence of Theo's gambling addiction and reckless spending. "Not when the court sees how you've endangered Lucas by enabling your son's violence," I said. More murmurs broke out as I revealed Theo's gambling habits and discretionary spending. My in-laws regarded me with dawning respect. Theo glared at me with impotent rage. "You deceitful snake! How dare you humiliate me like this?" I slammed my hands on the table, rattling the dishes. "How dare you subject Lucas to abuse while you secretly gamble away our money?" The room exploded into chaos, both families shouting. Lucas clung to me, trembling. In the pandemonium, I quietly slipped away with my son in tow, ready to start a new life far from this toxic household. Justice had been served. I finally reclaimed control after years of manipulation from Theo and Jonah. By exposing their deceit, I secured freedom and safety for myself and my son. The time had come for a new beginning. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, my life changed drastically. I filed for divorce from Theo and obtained a restraining order against Jonah. After years under their toxic roof, Lucas and I moved across the country to start fresh. It felt liberating finally breaking free from that dysfunction. But the fight wasn't over yet. I still had a custody battle looming against Theo, and knowing him, he wouldn't let go of Lucas without a war. Sure enough, Theo sent threatening emails declaring he'd fight me to the grave for custody. I braced myself for a bitter clash in family court. This time, I had right on my side. The day of our hearing arrived. Dressed in my best suit, I held Lucas's hand tightly as we entered the imposing courtroom. Theo sat at the front table wearing an arrogant smirk that made my blood boil. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Collins," called the bailiff. I squeezed Lucas's hand gently as we stood. Today, justice would finally prevail. Judge Collins peered over her spectacles. "This hearing is to resolve the matter of custody for minor child Lucas Walker, as well as the division of assets between Arya and Theodore Walker. Are both sides ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," I spoke clearly. Theo nodded, glaring daggers at me. For the next few hours, we presented evidence and testimony supporting our respective sides. I recounted numerous incidents detailing the abuse and endangerment Lucas suffered under Theo's roof, providing recordings and statements as proof. In contrast, Theo's case relied solely on arrogant entitlement, insisting blood relation alone made him most fit as a father. He cut an increasingly flustered figure, bravado melting under the onslaught of facts I presented exposing his parental negligence. Finally, Judge Collins held up a hand for silence. "I believe I've heard sufficient testimony to reach a decision." She peered over her glasses at Theo and I. "In the matter of Lucas Walker, full legal and physical custody is hereby granted to Arya Walker." Elation surged through me. "Yes!" I cried out, while Theo shouted in protest. The judge's gavel silenced him. "Furthermore, I am granting Arya Walker's request for child support from Theodore Walker in the amount of $1,200 monthly until Lucas turns 18. Theo's face turned an ugly purple shade. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to me." Judge Collins stared him down. "You subjected an innocent child to abuse by enabling a violent environment. Consider yourself lucky you aren't also facing criminal charges." Theo pointed a trembling finger at me. "You'll pay for this, I swear." The bailiff stepped forward. "Sir, that sounded like a threat. I must ask you to take your seat." Sinking back down, Theo buried his face in his hands. I maintained a dignified composure, determined not to sink to his level. I had taken the high road every step, presenting only facts and maintaining grace under pressure. In the end, justice spoke for itself. As Theo was escorted from the courtroom, Judge Collins gave me an approving nod. I scooped Lucas into my arms, showering his face with kisses. We had triumphed over deceit and abuse, securing a peaceful life for ourselves far from toxic influences. Good had prevailed. In the following days, I savored sweet victory. Reports came in of Theo sinking further into debt now that I had cut him off from my savings. Meanwhile, Jonah had been arrested for assaulting a classmate and was now facing criminal charges plus mandatory therapy. His reign of terror had finally ended. Lucas displayed resilience, bouncing back now that he was safe from harm. I enrolled him in a wonderful new school where he made friends and even joined an arts program. Each day the shadows of his past faded a little more. As for me, I relished this fresh start. The righteous satisfaction of exposing Theo and Jonah's cruelty, combined with securing Lucas in a loving home, gave me a sense of profound purpose. For the first time in years, I truly breathed free, the drama and chaos now behind me. Justice had been hard-won, but sweet. Lucas and I now walked in the light, the future stretching bright before us. In the months following the custody hearing, I received sporadic, threatening messages from Theo. He blamed me for destroying his life and swore I'd pay. I simply archived the messages in case they could be used as future evidence. Meanwhile, Theo's circumstances grew increasingly dire. His gambling spiraled out of control, racking up monumental debts. With no access to my savings anymore, he resorted to increasingly desperate measures. The day I received a call from his mother, I knew the reckoning had arrived. "Arya, dear, I'm sorry to bother you," Evelyn began, sounding strained. "But I'm afraid Theo's gotten himself into serious trouble." According to her, Theo had not only lost his job and declared bankruptcy, but had also resorted to theft from close family and friends to pay off furious bookies. His own parents had just filed a police report upon discovering $15,000 in heirloom jewelry missing from their home. My mind raced, wondering if any of my valuables had also been pilfered. As far as I knew, Theo had no idea where I'd moved to with Lucas. Still, unease crept down my spine. That night, I double-checked our door locks and windows. Lucas and I had created a peaceful sanctuary since escaping Theo's toxicity. I refused to let his desperate crimes disturb our new life. Sure enough, a week later, Evelyn called again, sobbing this time. Theo had robbed his own parents' home in broad daylight. While they were out grocery shopping, a neighbor spotted him racing down the street with bags of valuables. It was brazen, foolish desperation. The police soon caught up to him trying to hawk their stolen items at a pawn shop. I felt sick as Evelyn recounted how he'd screamed vicious obscenities at the officers, even spitting at them as they dragged him away in handcuffs. The Theo I'd known had descended fully into bitter madness, lashing out at the world as he faced the consequences of his cruelty. Some dark part of me whispered that he deserved this reckoning. But mostly I felt a profound sadness for the man he could have been, if not for the blackness in his heart. At Lucas's request, I arranged a supervised visit with Evelyn so she could see her grandson. They wept in each other's arms, two innocent souls scarred by Theo's degeneracy. It solidified my decision to move on fully, leaving Theo's darkness firmly in the past. A few months later, the final hammer fell. A short article in the local newspaper reported that former hedge fund manager Theodore Walker had pled guilty to charges ranging from theft to domestic abuse. He'd be serving a minimum 5-year prison sentence. I let out a shaky breath, the last cord tying me to Theo finally severed. He could no longer hurt us. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lucas asked, glancing up from his coloring book. I hugged him tightly. "Yes, baby, I'm more than okay." I smiled down at my sweet, resilient boy, who had weathered so much yet retained his shining spirit. We never heard from Theo again. I focused on giving Lucas the happiest, most secure childhood possible. Every day, we healed a little more. Years later, as I proudly watched Lucas graduate high school as valedictorian, I reflected on our journey. We had escaped toxicity and created a loving family from the ashes. The darkness did not win. In the end, love prevailed. Our scars made us stronger and brought us closer together. And though the road was long, we healed by walking it hand in hand. Lucas was, and always would be, my guiding light. The day I watched Lucas walk across the stage to accept his high school diploma, my heart swelled with pride. My sweet boy had blossomed into an intelligent, kind young man despite the cruelty he once endured. Seeing him grin as he clutched that hard-earned diploma stirred a profound mix of emotions: happiness, relief, satisfaction, and most powerfully, vindication. We did it, I thought. We survived the toxic storm and came out wiser on the other side. After Lucas's graduation ceremony, we went out to dinner with Evelyn to celebrate. She squeezed his hand, blinking back proud tears. "You did so well, Lucas. I know your parents are smiling down on you tonight." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She meant Theo too, of course. Evelyn had long forgiven her son's cruelty, but some wounds do not fully heal. After dinner, Lucas decided to head out with friends while Evelyn and I returned home. Settling on the porch swing with a glass of wine, I asked her delicately, "Have you heard anything about Theo lately?" She stared down at her lap. "He'll be eligible for parole in a year. I pray he's found some peace of mind after all this time." I hoped so too for her sake. People could change, but redemption required facing the past, something Theo had spent a lifetime avoiding. My phone buzzed and I glanced down. A text from Alicia read, "Did you hear? Jonah got arrested again." I quickly replied, "What happened?" Her response, "Caught vandalizing his high school gym." Third strike after all those bullying incidents years ago. I exhaled slowly. So his cruelty continued. "Jonah's been arrested again," I told Evelyn gently. She just nodded, unsurprised. Despite my bitter history with Theo and Jonah, I took no pleasure in their pain. But there were consequences to cruelty, a lesson I hoped they had finally learned. The bright spot was Lucas. Sheltered in a peaceful home, he grew into a thoughtful, intelligent man. The nightmares that once plagued him faded along with memories of his troubled childhood. Watching him thrive filled me with fierce pride. I had fought through hell to secure a loving, stable life for my son. The scars remained but shaped us with empathy and wisdom. Some nights, bittersweet nostalgia still washed over me. I would always mourn the happy family we could have been. But life was a winding road. The old saying proved true: when God closes a door, he opens a window. Though Theo rejected the light, Lucas and I walked in it proudly. By taking the high road, we broke the cycle of cruelty without sacrificing our humanity. After surviving the storm, we embraced a new dawn. The day Lucas left for college, we clung to each other weeping. "I'm so proud of you," I choked out. "Your strength inspires me every day." He squeezed me tight. "I owe it all to my hero mom. You gave me my life back." Watching him drive away to start his own life chapter, my heart swelled with love and hope. The past was behind us now. A bright future lay ahead for Lucas, one he could shape with his compassion and integrity. The years flew by in a blur. Lucas thrived in college and beyond, forging his own path. He married a lovely woman who treated him with the kindness he deserved. When they had a son of their own, Lucas vowed to give his child the happy, peaceful childhood he had missed, but always deserved. The cycle of cruelty, dysfunction, and lies ended with our family. By taking the high road, we found healing. From the ashes, goodness grew. And so the story comes full circle. My son, once tormented, now has fulfilled his destiny as a loving father. And I, having overcome darkness, can rest knowing I walk in the light. Our scars healed because we faced them together. Love prevails.